Did everybody get that little warning that we're recording? Okay, cool.
Yes.
I can't hear it. All right, so let's get started. Let's get started. I'm going to walk us through just a opening or introduction to how we got here. So to put this workshop in its larger context. So the Confined Arts is a program that I created about 1.5 years after my incarceration. I came home in 2013. In 2014, I created this program, which started as a series of exhibitions that featured the work of currently and formerly incarcerated artists. Over time, I was able to become a part of the Justice and Education Initiative at Columbia, and I was able to build the Confined Arts out into a program. And that's how we've been functioning since then. In 2020, the Confined Arts partnered with the Center for Court Innovation and Conspiring for Good to create the Arts Justice Safety Coalition. The mission of our coalition primarily is to map, galvanize, and support artists, arts organizations, and programs just working at the intersection of art and social justice. So this is really a space meant to be a resource. So to the point that I was making earlier about sharing work, this is a space where, as an artist, you should feel like, hey, I can lean in here and get some information or get some guidance, or just network with people that are doing like work where I can sort of build my own capacity for my work. I'll keep going. So with that, we do have a policy agenda. We have a short-term policy goals and we have some long-term policy goals. Our coalition seeks to advance alternatives to incarceration possibilities by positioning the arts as a necessary tool in prevention, pre-trial, supervised release, and post-conviction sentencing options by utilizing trauma-informed arts practices to inform public safety strategies and to center the humanity of individuals who are system impacted. So definitely just want to, put that out there because that is our driving force behind why we are working in the capacity we are working in. Our short-term goal, it involved us creating a project, which took so many shapes and forms. Hannah and Bruce can speak to that. And I think where we're at now, we've landed on it being a short film documentary piece that features the creativity of some folks who have gone through incarceration, men and women. So this is a theatrical event we are putting on. With that, it will complement a larger sort of policy direction we want to sort of introduce to district attorneys and different lawmakers as to how they can better use the arts in their work as an alternative to incarceration. So not just having this theatrical event, but that we are also, putting together these sort of quantifiable things that they can also, make sense of to say, okay, I can see how we can possibly use this, pilot these things, implement these changes, such and such. So within that long-term policy goals, it involves all of these things that are on your screen. But specifically, we are here for the training tools, and those training tools involve these professional development workshops because we are, at the forefront of advocacy and education and advocacy for those who are system impacted. So it's important that we also, create professional development opportunities and resources for one another so that we can strengthen each other. Iron sharpens iron, right? So, yes, so with that, through our partnership with the Center for Court Innovation and with the recent grant we just received from the Ford Foundation, the Arts Justice Safety Coalition is planning and will be running free workshops and artistic literacy trainings for teaching artists, practitioners, and legal advocates. So you can go to the Confined Arts website. It's right there on the front to just learn more about. We have opportunities for more workshops, but also for teaching opportunities. There are a number of workshops that we are looking for teaching artists for. So just a plug on that for y'all. If you are interested, the pay rates are up there. So yeah, I'll keep it moving for the sake of time. So with that, This is our fourth workshop of 4 that we created directly with the Center for Court Innovation, directly under the, I believe it is a Project Reset. And the first one was Introduction to the Arts as System Intervention. Then it was Strategic Arts Engagement, you know, really looking at how we use the arts intentionally, the impact it's having, and what areas it's touching on and lacking in. Our last workshop was on trauma-informed care. And this workshop specifically is like a 2.0 of the last workshop that we did, because in this, I'm gonna, you know, me and Sean are gonna walk through really quick what we went through last workshop, and then we'll take that into, you know, what Sean is gonna introduce to us as the arc for our curriculums, and then we'll take that into our breakout groups and we'll build from there. Sean, you wanted to jump in? Are we good? Cool.
You're good.
Cool. All right, so revisiting trauma-informed teaching and creative production in justice spaces. So again, the last workshop dealt specifically with those who are teaching and specifically going through that process of creating with those people who are justice involved. So we have a lot of folks who, you know, themselves have not been directly impacted, but are working with the demographic of people because, of course, they want to ensure representation is there. But sometimes the way we work with people is just as bad as us misrepresenting them. So we want to ensure that how we're working with folks is humane and is trauma-informed. So just going through this, can I transition and let you take this on, Sean?
Yeah, sure. Just to give you some background context as to how we're going to be approaching the lesson plan evaluations, to use that word very lightly today, through the lens of a trauma-informed practice, without getting into too much detail, because I trust that you all consumes this content prior to some degree. But really, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, to be very specific, is to, in regards to system impact in population. And that could be a youth population, that could be an adult population, whether formerly incarcerated, court involved, or otherwise. We are really looking at the ways in which their experiences of arrest and incarceration is housed within their bodies. And that therefore, there are ways in which we need to build an attunement to what might activate them in the space, whether environmentally, through the words that we use, through the processes that we share, and the pace of the exercise itself. And now when we say trauma, I want to be specific in that we are being inclusive of different kinds of trauma, whether it's acute, meaning a one-time thing that a person experienced directly, or repetitive trauma, which can be a situation in which a person is indirectly experiencing something that is impacting their nervous systems, the ways in which they experience a fight, flight, or freeze activation. But we also can be considering something that's environmental. So for example, when someone lives in an environment that continuously has violence surrounding them. And so we want to consider all 3 levels of trauma and the ways, again, that might really persist in one's nervous system and be activated in such a way that leads to an automated response that the person may not be entirely conscious of. So just as a backdrop, that is what we're considering in regards to trauma and trauma-informed practices. Go ahead, Pastor.
Thank you very much for that, Sean. That was very thorough. And just to also just add a footnote to that, research shows evidence that incarceration has negative psychological effects on people in prison. And these include specifically, I want y'all to just pay attention to these because you might have noticed some of these or you might come across some of them in the past. Dependence on institutional structure and contingencies, hypervigilance, interpersonal distrust and suspicion, emotional overcontrol, alienation and psychological distancing, social withdrawal and isolation, incorporation of exploitive norms of prison culture, a diminished sense of self-worth, and personal value, and post-traumatic stress reactions to the pains of prison. So these are just some different ways that, what that might look like, what trauma might look like specifically in a person who has experienced incarceration. Now, if we were to, put that on top of what people might have already been experiencing prior to incarceration, then we know that, folks may be dealing with a lot, and there's a lot that, may show up and can show up, so I'll keep us moving from here. Yeah, I just said that. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All of these slides as well will be shared with you in the end too. Just wanted to say that just in case anyone's wondering. Yeah. Yeah, so how important, I think these were one of the, if you want to touch on this a little bit, Sean, I can, but I think these were one of the slides you went through last week.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and we'll just briefly touch upon the areas, or I should say, the context to which we would like for you to look at 3 particular areas in your lesson plan and or practice. We can more broadly explore practices. One, and these 3 bullet points in the next few slides sort of touch upon them. So how can we be aware of what is in the physical environment, the architecture of the space, and the ways that that might echo what someone experienced within the institution of incarceration, the ways in which we create boundaries in our practices, so the interpersonal and intra-community boundaries and privacy that allows a person to opt in, and then also the practice of, as I've said, being attuned to how trauma manifests itself in the body and therefore in the space.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Yeah, so some other points we talked about were full participation, and this really involves that chemistry that's in the room. I want to say that that process of ensuring that folks are in the room feeling as equal and as represented in the room as you feel, and that's confident in many ways. And some of the ways that we can do that is being active in our listening, ensuring representation, and ensuring there's like collaborative leadership versus just including people for the sense of fulfilling a quota. Some of those listening points is ensuring that we are, not simply just listening not just listening to what's going on in our head because we're distracted about what's going on around us, but intently listening to what a person is saying, and then also what a person is not saying with their mouth, but also saying with their body. Sometimes people may not communicate to you that they're not comfortable with how close you've gotten to them to look over their shoulder at the paper, that you've given them. So sometimes you might see that in their body and how they move away from you. So how will we actively listening? Ensuring representation, ensuring that there's a sense of not disrespecting one's sense of individuality. I'll say it that way, and ensuring that we're respecting that without going too deep into that one. And collaborative leadership is exactly what it sounds like. Ensuring that even though you may be, the facilitator and you are the person guiding the workshop and you brought in the lesson plan, and in some ways you hold that sense of power in the space should still keep and harness a sense of collaborative leadership. So folks are able to be put in positions where they can also help amongst their group members, and also, that also goes into representation and how we bring people into the space. What's their role in the space? Is your role just to listen and do what I say, or is it to contribute to the final product of what we want to get to at the end of this, whole interaction? So yes, I'll let you go here, Sean.
Yeah, sure. So we're going to transition pretty quickly, but and you may want to take notes for those of you that are note takers.
Yeah.
So you will see that once we get into the group conversation, whether we decide in smaller breakout groups or a larger collective conversation, as I said, we want to be very keen as to really look at 3 different areas, components of your work: a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the qualities of the work that you've seen in the final slides find itself in all three areas, but I'll sort of speak specifically as to what we want you all to look at in the beginning, middle, and end. The first is quite literally, how do you open up the space? So what are your practices of greeting an individual and meeting them halfway? And you'll hear us talk about this over and over again. How are you meeting your group halfway? What are the ways in which in that opening process, and I'm using that term broadly, maybe it's an icebreaker exercise, maybe it's the way people introduce themselves to one another, maybe it's the way materials are introduced to the group. But what are the ways in which you're introducing an intentional slowness where you can read the group and meet people where they are? The other way I would speak about this opening process is, how are you prioritizing the relationship building versus product versus outcomes? And it's really in that opening space where you really have the opportunity for people to be grounded, not only in the space and in the process to come, but with one another, in relationship with one another. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, and I think this is the final slide. We'll stay here in just a moment. So in the second area, we really want to talk about process. And this goes back to the slide of authorship that Pastor just shared a little bit. But in your process of making, and we would all like for you to offer different examples of each one of these areas. But what are the ways in which, again, you're meeting people halfway? What are the ways in which the process is co-designed and co-authored based on not only what you see as the end game, but what people are bringing to the space? How are they fully contributing in whatever capacity that they have? And what are the ways in which throughout you are prioritizing people over product in a reciprocal relationship? And we land on this slide for very particular reasons. You know, in the language, in the methodologies that you are utilizing, how are you centering humanity? What are the ways in which you're introducing people into the work and the reasons why they are there? Are they always being spoken to as a formerly incarcerated individual? Or are they being spoken to and about as human beings? What is the language that you can use to affirm their existence and the totality of their experience, not just of arrest and or incarceration? And then finally, in the third area, how are people leaving the space? What are the ways, again, that you're seeing them halfway? And what are the ways in which you are prioritizing a deactivation, a slowness and a deliberate process where people can decompress, particularly if the content is addressing their experience with oppressive systems? So you can go ahead and stop share for a moment.
Yeah.
So before I share this next component, just out of curiosity, what are people's preferences in whether or not you have a paper form lesson plan right in front of you? You all, because I know many of you, are arriving in this space with particular practices, methodologies, and even full curriculums. So out of curiosity, what would be your preference? Small groups to discuss those three components, or would you prefer just a collective conversation? And you can utilize the chat on mic, whatever you'd like. Collective, okay. Amanda, I love the gesture you offered. I'm seeing a bunch of nods for collective. Okay, great.
You know, I'm going to go with you all because that means I don't have to facilitate breakout rooms. Perfect. Let's do this.
Beautiful. Cool. All right, so we'll get there for a moment, and we'll slowly go through those three areas that I just articulated. But before we do that, we wanted to make sure that we understand, because people are coming at this work through a number of different styles and ways in which they've come to system intervention practices. And so we also wanted to give a holistic understanding of typically what are expectations of a lesson plan. And what you will see in a formal lesson plan is that the first page to 2 pages is typically divided into 4 areas. A summary, which gives a few sentence overview of what the hell the thing is. And so, and you might think about it in terms of what are people doing, who are we talking about, and why are they doing it, in 3 to 4 sentences. After a summary, what you will often, and quite literally, oftentimes lesson plans are divided in quadrants with the 4 areas that I'm about to discuss in each, and divided on that paper. So a summary, let's say in the left corner, in the right corner, objectives. What are the stated goals? And so you're not discussing process in that area. You're saying at the end of the program, project, exercise, this will be achieved in very clear language. Okay, let's say that's in the top corner. In the bottom left corner, you might see a request for a statement of intent, or you might see something more to the effect of a problem statement. What is this lesson, workshop, exercise attempting to resolve? And I use that word very lightly because nothing in this life is resolved. But what is the pathway to achieving those stated objectives, and with who? That problem statement or statement of intent should emphasize the who, which you might be surprised, or maybe you would not, is often left out of a teaching artist's intent, because we become so fixated on process, we forget to connect the dots as to why a particular process might resonate with a particular population. So that is what that statement should entail. And then the final area quite often is a overview of process. What are the materials that you're going to use? What is the methodology? What are the ways that you're going to go about this thing? All right. Now, I say this as an introduction because as a practitioner, I personally never use formal lesson plans. Even though that is the expectation, I even approach the document itself in more of an experimental fashion. And so what I'm about to share with you is not divided into quadrants or anything that I just described. However, it does detail the areas as part of its intentionality. So I'm going to share screen in a moment. Okay, and quite often, you know, I'm sharing with you this in document form, which is rather boring in text, but then in a moment, I'm going to share with you this same language in a curricular format that's on a website, which I much prefer. So this is a project that actually led to my practice at Assembly, the youth-based diversion program, alternative incarceration program here at Recess in Brooklyn. And I'll just go through some language just so you get a sense of how we approached it. And this, I should say, was a project that was developed over the course of 5 years. And we consider it a living curriculum, meaning with each community that it moves into and with, the language, the methodology, and the steps change, especially as it pertains to context. So this lesson is meant to be adapted. The goal of Mirror Echo Tilt, which was ultimately the name of the project, is to work with people affected by the criminal justice system to create a visual performance-based curriculum that reframes personal narratives, promotes individual agency, and breaks down the myth of the criminal. Very simple, not even it's like 2 sentences at most. What is this thing? The summary, Mirror Echo Tilt is a project created in a summary, you can say, just really expands on the synopsis and gives more of the intent and also overview. And I'll go through this quickly. As a project created in collaboration with people who are court involved, formerly incarcerated, or otherwise affected by the criminal justice system. So we expand on the who. Through a curriculum based on visual storytelling, as you can see above, we said visual performance-based curriculum. Now we're being specific as to what we mean. Visual storytelling. Participants translate personal narratives into performance in order to replace a culturally embedded conception of criminality with new language so that the mind and body may think, feel, and move in a way not defined by their previous experience with incarceration. So you'll see two things in that language. One, we're expanding on the methodology itself. What are the things, what is the skill set that we're employing? What is the medium that we're emphasizing? But even more specifically, we're emphasizing the why as it pertains to the who, to replace a culturally embedded conception of criminality with new language. Our goal is to facilitate participants' agency to tell their own stories and ultimately reframe existing narratives defining the criminal. And I'll go on, I don't want to take too much time. And the goals, you'll see, I'll share some of this through our workshop process. We unpack the mechanisms operating behind the criminalization of Black and brown bodies. Participants translate personal narratives into performance in order to regain agency in the telling their own stories. A focus on concepts of aspiration and joy is thus necessary. The radical reimagining of how one sees themselves within narratives of incarceration, imprisonment, and reentry, and is later able to retell their personal history. And again, it's sort of this area, the goals, dives a little more deeply into the methodology and intentionality itself. We use performance to strip down personal stories to their emotional core and to convey the most essential elements with minimal gesture as a way to look for the meanings at the heart of their experiences. And, I'm skipping around a little bit, but what is uncommon in terms of the lesson plan is that we actually list a series of themes that influence the work. So reconfiguring the hero figure, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, masculine identity as performance, doubling or double consciousness, and the ways in which a person is contending with two versions of themselves, one which precedes them by stereotype and systemic oppression, and the ways in which someone sees themselves. And then we get into the core methodology and how we really devise the exercises. And often, again, what we're prioritizing here are not the particular steps yet, but we're giving an overview as to what is behind the methodology itself. Silent, minimal, frozen gesture, a process of externalizing one story, a media analysis in the ways in which Black and brown citizens are depicted in the media broadly, and media visualization. How do we therefore take our stories and give it form? And then we get into the nuts and bolts of each particular lesson. And you'll see that in the way that I stylize this document, I prioritize questions as opposed to steps. And so there are very clear ways to approach this particular exercise, but I also give myself the language that I'm going to use in the space, which you might not find in a lesson plan often. So this is a particular image theater exercise where you walk in your own walk, but in different contexts, walk as if you were on the street in your neighborhood, walk as if you were in the school, et cetera, et cetera. And then you'll see that I offer questions. Did your walks change? If not, was that a conscious decision, et cetera, et cetera? And then I leave each week, and you'll see, I leave each exercise, rather, with a few areas in these italicized areas, these areas sort of articulate what is in my own language I want to land on at the end of the exercise. So again, I'm offering not only the language, but the intent as embedded in these anecdotes and quotes. And so one example would be, every day is a performance. From the moment we choose what to wear to the way we walk down the street, every decision, every moment, whether conscious or not, carries with it some meaning. That is what I need to land on for that exercise to carry its intent. And I'll skip around, but I'll leave you with this one, which as it pertains to walking. Suspicion, for example, is the meaning that Laquan McDonald was shot 16 times upon arrival, why Tamir Rice was shot upon arrival, Why Jonathan Farrell was shot upon arrival, why Freddie Gray was pursued, why Walter Scott was shot in the back, why 50 bullets were shot to Sean Bell's car, and why Trayvon Martin was followed. I give myself that in the lesson plan itself, so you can meditate on the exercise's meaning, not just the steps, but what it is, the impact that you want to leave someone with in my own language and with my own sort of context. And I'll leave there without going through the rest of the document, and I'll just share very quickly what it looks like in website form. So you'll see, and again, this would be my preference, but you'll see that in website form, we give you a breakout of a number of different areas. So I'm working backwards. We offer you writings that influence each lesson. We have video content that will therefore visualize how the curriculum has flowed in the past, what it might look like in terms of production. We'll give you photo that really illuminates what the exercise might look like. And then the curriculum area is broken down similarly to what I just showed you. But the effectiveness of this is that it's not only given to you in a weekly format, but we also offer you video tutorials within the website. And so it really gives you a step-by-step process, not only by text, but in ways in which you can just watch. And without playing it, what you'll see is that the camera treats the participant and me in the space as if I were attempting to teach it. So as opposed to just a fixed camera in the space, just seeing the process unfold, the camera and I speak to each other as if I were teaching the viewer of the video. Let's see. Okay, how are people feeling? You ready to, so again, not the perfect, oh, thank you, Abby. Very nice. That's a document that has changed over the course of many years through contact and experience with many different populations. And while I don't lead the workshops myself, it is the substance, no longer, I should say, it is the substance for which all of the educators come into the assembly program and breathe new life into the program. And so, again, we're going to recalibrate. We won't be talking about those areas of intent. I just wanted to share with you what the sort of container for the lesson plans. But again, we want to be specific of 3 different areas, and we'll just open up the floor. So who can offer an example in the first area? Quite literally, you're opening the door. Folks are coming into the space. What are the ways in which anyone in this space, and anyone in this virtual space, has prioritized a slowness, a relationship building, and again, a returning to meeting people where they're at? And I'll say that in each one of these exercises. Anyone have an example? Or a question? Smile and greet. Thank you, Gino. Thank you for being with us too. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's often overlooked. Izzy, go for it.
Yeah, in the space that I've worked at in the past, we tend to start, we have kind of chill music playing in the background, where we don't have fluorescent lights on in the space. We kind of have different diffuse lights, so it's not too intense or jarring when you come in. And then after people take their time getting settled, before we start whatever the activities are, we sit in a circle and do some deep breathing, and always do a check-in question about emotions, or sometimes not directly about emotions, but something that kind of gets to how someone's feeling.
All right, beautiful. You said you offered a few things, Izzy. I'm just going to stop real quick on the architectural pieces that you described. Lighting, sound. Did you describe anything about the layout of the space?
Oh, no, the space is, it's fairly open. So it's mainly structured by tables and the objects that are in the room. So we tend to, where we end up circling up is sort of in the back of the room. So you walk through and you can see everything. And then you
right.
when you're
okay.
ready.
So moving the conversation to other folks in the room, you know, there was the mention of diffuse lighting. There was a particular type of music, a slower tempo of music, and then an open space. Why would these, in regards to a trauma-informed practice, how do these start to connect in regards to an intentionality of slowness and prioritizing where people are at? What would any of those elements do for a person? No wrong answers.
Could you repeat that?
Yes, of course. In the physical elements that Izzy described, why would those actually be of benefit to the opening? Yep, Edwin, thank you. Calming them down, right? What else?
It helps them to feel approachable to a situation, to approach whoever's there, to be welcoming, to feel welcomed.
Beautiful, beautifully said.
We do a similar thing at Echoes. I think our conversations around it is to like transition from the outside world into the new space that we're trying to create. So with that deep breathing, it's like, okay, might have been a little frazzled or whatever the case may be before, but let's try to recenter and figure out a little bit and think about where we're at and have that little conversation before we just jump right into whatever it is. Because there's always so much that we want to do, but we really have to start with that.
Beautifully said. You know, what I often will say in the first period of contact is, I fully acknowledge that I have no idea how much life you've lived before you entered this space. And I will say that in a number of different ways. But think about, you know, just the subway ride, or the state of the subway right now, and how activated a person might be just from the method of transportation that they took on the way to a program, and a program that might be mandated, no less. So their psychology is that they're being forced to. And I'll revisit that in a moment. But Edwin, let's talk, I'm going to draw you in a little bit. Let's talk about the calming and what you might mean by that.
So like in these days of like Zoom meetings and not so much in-persons, even though you do have in-persons, everybody, like you mentioned the subway, everybody's coming from somewhere and things might get crazy. You might have witnessed an argument somewhere, or you know, you didn't have a good night sleep, or you know, something happened with your family yesterday or whatever, right? So coming into the space, whatever space it is, if you do play music, or you just like, hey, how you doing? Like, just start calling people's name out, like, hi, Abby, and hi, Anna, you know, that type of stuff kind of could make anybody that was having a rough day or rough yesterday or rough morning, just to calm down, you know, just be like, you know what, I'm gonna be present. You know, the facilitator seems like he or she's doing, you know, ready and is prepared for this meeting that I'm about to have, or this workshop. So let me just be attentive and be that way, and that way, you know, the music and just like the greeting and things of that nature will help. I know that it will help me calm down a bit if I was a little restless. So that's why I mentioned that. Beautiful, Edwin.
And so there's a few things that you're articulating there, right? You know, an acknowledgement of what a person may have survived just to be in the space. What are the ways in which we are not only acknowledging that, but seeing that and offering, to your point, Amanda, a transition with intention, a moment. So we can't expect anyone to just like switch or flip the switch and be present in the moment, which is often the demand of this work. We want someone to be generous and be in the space with as much of their mental, emotional, and physical capacity as possible. But what are the ways in which we're drawing a person into that with a slow intention? Abby, and I'm going to come to you, Tonya, because I really love the comment that you left in the chat. But Abby, I want to speak specifically about the physical space and what you've offered here. Can you speak a little bit more, Abby, about what you wrote in the chat?
Yeah, I hope that this is relevant to the physical space, but because of the way, you know, if you put everyone in a circle, this tends to be where my lesson plan makes the greatest shift. I usually come in with an intention, and then it's in the opening and in the slowness and seeing how people and being able to observe how people are interacting with the atmosphere or with each other. A lot of times at Project Reset, if I'll see someone immediately take a chair that's in a circle and turn their back away. And that's when I know that I need to kind of maybe shift things. If people are talking to each other, there might already be a certain energy that I can highlight. But this is when I can start to see how the group is interacting, because I only have 2 hours and it's high turnover. 2 hours with everybody, and then I don't see them again. That's how Project Reset works. So it's a really interesting space. I've never worked in something like that. So this is where I, as a facilitator, can really get a temperature check of each individual and the space and start to realize, like, maybe I need to open with something that's a seated activity, something that's more conversational, and start to open people up. Maybe this needs to be more of a writing day. Looks like I can actually hone everyone's energy into playful theatrical games, which is where I kind of usually facilitate. So that's kind of what I was more referring to around being able to observe individuals in the group.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abby. And I'll tie that into physical space in a moment, but when you're building an attunement of seeing where people are at, where is it that you preserve some malleability in your exercise or in your workshop entirely? I have walked into a space and similarly, Abby, read the room and threw the lesson plan right out the fucking window. Because there's a charge or there's a way in which people are withdrawing or isolating themselves. And you need to move from the energy that is present, not the one that you wish for. Some of that is being aware of how people are responding to the space itself. So some folks on week one, you might sense require, and part of the reason I went to you was like an open space, which then dictates the layout. Or maybe it's that the materiality, the presence of materials and decorations everywhere from floor to ceiling is what people are connecting with. That sort of, that energizes them. It really depends on the group. And you won't know that until after week one, right? Ty, I'll come to you in a moment. Tanya, rather, if you can unmic and elaborate on your piece, because I think this is really vital in regards to putting up barriers between yourself and a participant. Tanya, are you there? Maybe mic is not possible, but let me call some other folks in regards to, so we spoke a little bit about physical barriers, but what are other ways in which we might unintentionally place a barrier between ourselves and a participant or group?
I would say, I'm sorry. Oh, you know what?
I was just gonna say,
no, what I was gonna say is, how do you want to do this, Sean? Because you have hands in the chat, and then you have folks like myself who are jumping in. How do you want to do this?
I will navigate. Let's go to you first, and then Gino as a response, and then actually I'm just gonna put Bruce in on the spot on this question too.
Okay, I was just gonna say a defensive attitude. I see a lot of facilitators, get personal when what they want to do is rejected. And they get defensive about it, and I think that's the biggest way to put a barrier between yourself and other people.
Beautiful. Gino.
Thank you. Yeah, I would also double that as well. Not taking things personal is definitely the best way for any educator, facilitator to move. I would say with that, adding on to that, not being present, not being in the moment. Your mind is somewhere else. You're thinking about, what you need to do later, or a problem, an argument you had with someone, and so you're not in your flow essentially when you're there. And I think that's a barrier between you and your audience.
There you go. Like, what is the point of contact energetically, right? Not only physically or in terms of speed, but energetically. If the very first person that they meet is at all defensive and or passive, how does that set the tone? Bruce, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I'm going to read a few things in the chat first. Catherine offers, we set up the space away from the door in the back corner Beautiful. There's water and snacks for people immediately upon entering, right? Right, getting there to our basic human needs first and foremost before production. We make that offering. There's a reflection question for people to journal about as others filter in. Okay, beautifully. That's gorgeous. Giving folks an intended purpose right from the jump, but a slow one that meets them where they're at. Okja, I hope I'm saying that correctly, be responsive to the possibility or opportunities for immediate exchange by being willing to share vulnerability and decentralized power dynamics. I could not emphasize this more enough, right? What are the ways in which, whether consciously or not, you are, upon greeting, saying to someone, I'm teaching artist, you're participant. Instead of saying, whether it's through your body language, the words that you're using, I'm Sean and you're who? And let's start there. And Noah, I forget, how do I say your name again?
Yeah, Noah, you got it right.
Noah, it's good to see you, Brooklyn Museum fam. Speak a little bit about the metaphysical before I turn to Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, G brought up the word flow and you were talking about energy, right? I think a lot of this kind of introductory stuff, kind of setting the tone, I think it's really about getting people on the same wavelength, so things like the music, the lighting, all of that. I think it's just a way to kind of occupy that same space and kind of settle in a little bit, spending a couple of those slow minutes together just to kind of tune in to one another. And the physical, I think, informs the metaphysical. The physical informs the energy and the flow of how that day is going to be going.
Thank you. And beautifully said. I mean, and I wanted for you to speak for a moment because of the challenge that is particular to a place like the Brooklyn Museum, where an individual is entering not the program space itself, but this giant institutional architecture that we often forget mimics the institutional architecture of enclosure, confinement, etc. So what are the ways that we can then be aware of that and further disrupt their sensibilities of where they're at and for what purposes? It's a challenge. We don't get it right all the time. Bruce, and then Ty, and then we'll move on to Hannah before going to the second second part of the curriculum. Go for it, Bruce.
Thanks, Sean. We work with a group of incarcerated men at Auburn Correctional Facility, some of whom have been in the group for a number of years, others who have just joined. We just took in, the men just admitted some new members. So, and we are, a lot of how we work is prescribed by the prison, right? We cannot touch the men. We can't shake hands. We can't fist bump. So we get to the school before they do. We're checked in, we go to the schoolhouse. We're in a large room with desks, like student desks, and we move everything to the side so that there's an open space. The men arrive from one of 5 cell blocks, and they arrive at different times because all the cell blocks are not released at once to go to activities. So we have what we call schmooze time, because we can chat individually with the men. Some of the men have seen each other during the week because they're in the same cell block or they're in honor block. Others of the men in the group have not seen each other for the entire week. So there's a kind of social conversation for probably about 10 minutes or so, because that's how long it takes for all the cell blocks and all the men to get to the room. And then when we sense that it's time to begin, one of the members will volunteer to lead the opening, which we form a large circle standing, and there's an opening mantra or slogan that was written by one of the men years ago and is passed down to what we call each generation. Each group of new members is a generation. We're on our 6th generation of members. And the habit in the group is that men who have come into the group stay in the group as long as they're at Auburn. So there's a 2-year cycle, and the men repeat that cycle over and over and help guide and support the new members in that process. So we form a circle. the mantra is, we are a community of transformation. Through the power of self-discovery, we create the opportunity to know and grow into ourselves. And then the member who's led the motto also leads us in 3 Tao breaths to kind of inhale new energy and exhale what's ever troubling or burdening you. And then we go around the circle with a check-in. What's happened during the week? What's going on with you? What's new in your life? What's been stressful in your life? And we talk about those things in the circle. And then someone in the group, again, because it's a co-facilitated group amongst those of us who are civilians and those men who are incarcerated. So we have a physical warm-up, some breathing, some stretching, usually a kind of improv or something. And then we move on to whatever the work for the evening might be, which can change at any minute.
Right.
So, for example, we know what the process is of those 2 years, and so do the older members. And so we're about to enter into about an 8 to 10 week process, which is about the physical trauma held in the body, which is called characterology, which is not dissimilar from what Sean does. But it's different in a sense because it has to do with energy trapped in the body and how that forms you. But then if someone has something that they need to process, that's what we do.
Right on. Bruce, let me pause you there.
Yeah,
so we
and
can
I'll
move
stop right there.
The room. But I do want to pull on 2 things just to emphasize the way in which Bruce and his community from the jump is introducing humanizing language in the circling that he described. And that also the peer-to-peer platform where all the responsibility of introduction is now left to the teaching artist, but other folks that have been part of the process. Ty, sorry it took so long.
Hey, that's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say an opening activity I like is like providing participants with a piece of paper to write down whatever they need to put down to participate openly during, the activities for the day, and then allowing them to put it in a jar that kind of contains, what it is with an example on the board. Like I may need to put down, I had a really stressful commute, and place it into the jar so that I can let that go to participate here in the space.
Oh, that's nice. So a different method of externalization. That is like, it's still with you, it's still in your body, but let's just quite literally put it here for the moment so that we can participate. Well done, well done. Hannah.
Yeah, I have a specific question that I wonder if others can speak to. And obviously this is more relevant in some contexts than others, but I find sometimes that in my teaching experience, a large barrier is cell phones. And I wonder about if there are ways that other folks have experienced, because sometimes that ability to go in and to be by yourself with your phone is a necessary lifeline, and understanding that folks are coming from a variety of experiences that they might need to hold on to something. And certainly I as teacher or anyone doesn't want to reinforce that power dynamic of asking someone to put down one of their belongings or kind of, and yet at the same time, it's the cell phone is often such a barrier to being present and being with the collective group. So I just wanted to pose that, and maybe this is a question for the end, and we can move on to that, but I'm interested if others have found successful ways to recognize the presence of cell phones and without forcing folks to drop them or to move away from them, while also kind of encouraging folks to be present away from their device.
Right on. Edwin has stated community agreements, which can actually set standards for that. But Ty, and then Pastor.
I was going to say the same thing, community agreements that you go over in the beginning.
Pastor?
Hey, you know what, Hannah? In the beginning, we take phones. Can't have your phone. I'm just playing. But that's the sort of energy, though. That's the energy, though, because in reality, it's like setting those community rules are important. But to some extent, you know, we know folks, you know, because folks have kids, folks have, you know, parents who are sick and all of these things. So they need to be able to see their phone or be able to access it, but it doesn't need to be in your hand. So put it on vibrate, put it in your pocket, respect people in the space. Also, sometimes we're having, I think the best way to do it, because it may be easier for me in the space to say that than you, Hannah, you know, and that's something to think about too, because who's saying what to who also means a lot, you know. But what I try to do is put it in perspective, like, hey, so would you feel comfortable if I had my phone out while you was talking about something real personal? You know, we don't know if you're recording or this, that, the other. Just show people the respect in the room to put your phone away. If you have an emergency and you need to get on your phone, step to the side and do that outside of the group. But within this space, if you could just keep your phone not visible, that would be most respectful to everybody. And I think just putting it in perspective for everyone so that everyone feels comfortable, I think is good. And then from there, take the phones.
In the chat, I've just said, yes, center shared experience, or Colby incorporates the phone into lesson plans. However, I teach music where their phones have apps that they can use. So it's very specific as to what they're doing in the phones. And Ty has offered maybe also giving 5-minute breaks between activities. And that is something that I utilize. It's the expectation that on the horizon, you will be able to check in, acknowledging that life is still happening and that folks, as Pastor said, have children. And so often my protocol is you will be able to check your phone at the hour mark, and you'll be able to, you know, do what you got to do. I acknowledge that your life is still happening. And then I want to pull a piece of wisdom that pastors offered, having the community agreement delivered not by you, but by other peers in the space. So that it feels like an agreement and not a mandate. Bruce.
Yeah, this is a totally different context, but I've used it in teaching because students pull out their phones all the time. And so I've come up with a way of having everybody text a question about the reading that day to somebody else in the room. And then it sparks a conversation. So to adapt that to your situation, Hannah, you might have everybody throw their cell phone numbers in the middle of the room and everybody picks a number and then have them text to each other a suggestion about how they deal with cell phones in the space and read them out loud. So that
a little bit of deception.
So that you use the phone and everybody else's ideas about the phone as a way to come up with a community agreement.
Beautiful. Pastor, did you have your hand up still? That's
no,
really well done,
but
Bruce.
I love the creativity in the room.
So we are going to be terrible on time, so I want to keep moving this along, if that's okay, Ty. Let's move on to the second section, which in this room is critical. How are we calling people into the making process? What are the ways that they are contributing on their own terms and co-authoring or co-designing the process? And I want to, as a context, offer a distinction between co-design and co-authorship. And without their placing any judgment as to how we conduct our work. In regards to co-design, the steps, the lessons might be very clearly outlined. It's the ways in which those lessons are carried out that offers collaboration, or the entire process and product is authored by the collective, which requires more time. You know, Abby has 2 hours with folks. That's not going to be a collective co-authorship of a thing, because that would take all 2 hours. And so I want to offer a distinction, not into regards to judgment, but based on the conditions of what you have. Yeah. So what are practices that people are doing in terms of calling people into a practice? And we'll spend 10 minutes here and do another 10 or 15 on the final component.
If I could share very quickly, one thing that I like to do is I've been able to generate a prompt as soon as they come into the space. Just a general prompt, usually 2 questions. And then I ask them to share that in their journals that they get. They all get an individual little mini moleskin for them to have. I ask them to write the answer in their journal. We do our program, and then when we get to the 2nd hour mark of our program, we start the art activity. And that's when I bring back the question for people to share. As they are doing the activity, we're also having casual conversation about what the prompt was. So then that way we're like, I bring it back around so that we can all share as we're making art together. So it makes a nice kind of communal experience.
Okay. Let's keep moving around the room, and then I'm going to force us to be critical of one another. Okay. This Ty, I like the idea of having 3 potential lesson topics and allowing participants to vote, okay, of the 3 possible lessons that they need most that day, depending on how they are feeling, etc. Beautiful. So an opting in. Anyone else? Let me ask you this as a way to push the conversation on, and I'll use the examples. So and I'm offering criticism only to advance the conversation, not knowing fully how it is that you approach this. Yeah, this is my job. So in the example of G's, in which there's a revisiting of the prompt and a 2-part component, where is it that you may lose an individual? First question. And in the process that Ty outlined, what are the ways in which in the opting in or selection, you may lose someone?
Is that to be answered, or am I just supposed to ponder?
Let's not let you answer it. Given that you offered it. Thank you. In other words, what are the inherent risks to any of our processes? But in the examples that we have at the table.
I have an answer, but
Go ahead, G.
All right. Well, essentially, the way that you could lose someone is that they don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to open up. They don't want to share. I've had that happen as well. So that's definitely something that, you have to confront. But I always do understand that when one person shares, someone else begins to start opening up and opening up. It's like peeling back an onion kind of a thing.
That's right. Starts to snowball. But thank you. Thank you for sharing that vulnerability. There are ways in which, particularly when you move from a writing exercise to a sharing or art making exercise, there, particularly for introverts, that transition can feel really abrupt if not done with care and a slowness. And I agree with you, G. The snowball effect is something that we all, I think, rely on, that where it starts to build in the space with time. And go ahead, Edwin.
I would just point out the fact, like, sometimes it might be a little difficult when the participants are younger, especially when it comes to that cell phone situation. So a lot of the risk is because as adults, when you spark a conversation in the class, and it might trigger everyone else to contribute, right? But in the young, one kid might open up, but the other ones might just shut down more, or be
very true.
Right. So get on that individual for opening up or something like that. So it's always a risk. It's always a risk when it comes to young individuals opposed to older adults.
Well said. And I think knowing G and other folks in this space, what that will often dictate, therefore, is backup plan. Because as that one individual stepping forward, especially in youth populations, it's a great possibility that the rest of the group start to withdraw. because, oh, this person's taking up the space, I'm good. And so there's always a risk in the reliance on that ripple effect. Oksha, I would love for you to share your piece here, because I wanted to spend a little time there before we move to Ty. And am I saying your name correctly?
Yeah, you are. Thanks. I think that more often than not, at least for me, if I am not clear and able to reframe how to move forward in multiple different ways, if necessary, I can definitely lose the ability for people to see themselves in an activity, or to see the potential for them to feel seen. Mm-hmm. And that can be really problematic, you know.
You get trapped in your own language.
Facilitator. Yeah. Absolutely.
When I share the assembly curriculum with other teachers, with other educators, artists, I try to make the point that what's present in the lesson plan is my own language. But I also try to emphasize, for each instruction or each prompt, I have a practice of saying the same thing 3 to 6 different ways, one right after the other. Because of what you've pointed out, you never know what language is going to land with whom. And so I'm seeing the exact same prompt, but with different language, 3 to 6 different ways. Ty.
Okay, I was going to say with the issue of vulnerability, I feel like 2 things could help with that. One is the educator modeling vulnerability, as somebody kind of brought up before. If you're doing it, it can encourage others to do it as well. And then also using turn and talk between 2 pairs, so that sometimes people don't want to share out with everyone, but talking to one person and being vulnerable with one person can be a lot easier.
There you go. Making it smaller for folks, pairing off or making smaller groups. I'm just going to read out a few things in the chat before moving on to the last section. Catherine, in the museum setting, we're talking about the exhibits. Can sometimes lose people if I'm giving them a lot of new information, right? Just too much all at once. Sometimes hard to strike the balance between open discussion and the need to contextualize the objects. I would also, in addition, say, Catherine, some people just may not like what they're looking at. And then, right, becomes a barrier right off the jump. Abby, at Rikers, I teach theater improv. I tend to allow co-authorship to naturally arise through diversion, play, and improvisation. So allowing the exercise to lead to XYZ. Then we move to a more convergent space to decide on where our devised show will land. We reflect on past scenes and look to what themes and characters the group would like to revisit. And Oksha, having the flexibility to support a group to take ownership and craft their experience as they see necessary. Now let me, Sadiq, and then I'll offer one last point and then we'll move on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer quickly, like sometimes, even like sometimes having the participant or one of the participants even just like repeat back like what they heard or what they thought they heard, or even if you are providing instructions, having a participant sometimes repeat back what they felt like they heard the instructions to be, because they will reframe it in a way that was accessible to them and, you know, potentially others in the group. And so, like, you know, it allows them to also step into, like, you know, a moment of leadership and talk about what the next, and lead the group on what the next activity is based on what they heard from you as the facilitator. But I also think about, you know, the virtual settings and, you know, things that may also be happening virtually. And so, for, you know, sharing documents via Zoom or whatever medium, also sometimes just asking folks, you know, are you able to access, is anyone having interest accessing the document? So that way, like the group, like anyone in the group, if they're having some difficulties, doesn't feel like isolated or left out or left behind in the group, I think is also really important, which is like simply pausing and taking those moments so that way everyone is in the same place.
Well said. Well, I love all that, Sadiq. Like, what are the ways in which you're building co-leadership from the jump, right? In the moment, you know, not occupying the role of authority for the entire workshop, offering the prompt to be reworded by someone else, or for someone else to all of a sudden step into a role and determining what the next step is. You know, I'm gonna, and before we move on to the closing, I'm going to offer a pushback to what everyone has ever said, everyone has offered yet this far. You should also reserve the possibility that someone may need to opt the fuck out. And that is also okay. And that can look like in a lot of different ways. But I have that the importance is to acknowledge it and speak it in the room and not ignore an individual and the energy coming from that individual. So I have quite literally said to a young person, I know you're not in a place where you want to participate. I'm going to ask you to just be there and observe, but you have to at least be aware of what's happening around you. And that homie could be silent for the next 2 hours. I'm good, as long as I'm acknowledging it in the space and making it aware for everyone else in the room, so that there's not an awkwardness to that, right? G, and then we'll move on.
First up, I just want to say I definitely have had moments like that where I feel a participant has checked out, I guess I would say. But I think, again, I go back to what someone had said before about this idea that if you don't take it personal, you know, obviously that has something to do with where they are and what's happening with them and in their surroundings. So I think it's best to, as you said, address it. Don't push it away. Don't give it resistance, and go with that. Be like, all right, cool, observe, because everyone here is fully participating. So eventually, like I'm saying, it goes back to the idea of like, some people just need a little bit more time to get into the groove, if that makes sense.
That's right. And it might be 3 weeks from that point. It may not be right at the moment. It might take an individual much later. But what's important is that you either offer them a role or I should say, offer them a role and acknowledging the space. And what I will also, to the point that G offered, I've not taken it personally. As educators, I pride myself on going into a space, even if it's a community that I do not know, full of energy and full of promise. And I know what that defeat feels like, because you have expectations that you're so damn good at what you do that everyone is going to participate at 100%. And so I just wanted to say it is very difficult to not take it personally. But then you start to the opting, thank you, Tata, the opting in and opting out, that is part of a process, and it has less to do with your own shortcomings. And to really think about that. An open door, we all have boundaries and need to be respected. Absolutely. So last 10 minutes, we're closing out, whether that's at the end of a 6-week cycle, 1 year or 5-year cycle, or 1 day, maybe it's 2 hours. How are we returning to meeting people where they're at, a slow intentionality, and a process in which, as we brought them in, we're leading them out as well? Any examples?
If I could share, it's been really nice this season at the museum because there's a special exhibition that's going on. And in the exhibition, there's a installation of a house in the museum. I think they call it the societal sculpture. So I always forget the name of it. I call it the public house because it's meant to be activated by the public. So what's been nice this season is at the end of each session, after our art making activity and with our discussion, we walk to this public house, almost like a little mini parade, and we go into the public house to activate that space where we share our work. We have a small little discussion, and I give a moment in time for everyone to just kind of last thoughts, reflections on what happened. And it's been a very, very nice way to end the program this season.
Thank you for that, G. Anyone else? Catherine.
So similar to G, I'm at the Brooklyn Museum and we do a share of the artwork, and the way it's really simple. So people just share what they made, and then I encourage them to compliment each other. So it's not so long. It's like just shower this person with love, basically, because they just made something, which is always, in my opinion, awesome. And then after we do that, it's just like, what's a takeaway from today? And usually by then we're out of time. It could go on, but we're always out of time. So
no doubt. I think we all face that, wanting 5 more minutes. Yes, Abby.
When I was over in Cook County Jail with women that were opting into the program, so it kind of was more for people that were used to the program and excited and enthusiastic. We used to do a waterfall poem. So we'd have a big piece of paper and everyone would throw out words that came up throughout the entire session of that day. We put them on the board and then invite everyone to write a poem or a short story or something using those words as an inspiration. And then anyone that wanted to share could. And it was something that was also effective that we could take outside of the space if per their, their permission, that we could share with other people that were interested in the program or they could take with them. And it was inspired by that day's session alone.
Fantastic. Ty, would you like to just vocalize what you offered in the chat?
Sure, just like an open discussion, asking folks like, what did they gain from the work? What would they change about the workshop? Before we go, do you want to share anything with the group?
Beautiful. Now, I'm going to pick up off of that and in the spirit of generosity and vulnerability, offer you a way in which I fucked up in the past on a closing. And it returns to this idea of really wanting it to go the way that I had conceived of it. And there was an individual in the nature of the assembly workshop where we were moving through a physical embodiment that very clearly, for whatever purposes, determined that they wanted to be or assume the role of agitator. And really, over the course of 2.5 hours, really started to push on people's boundaries. And I, in my frustration, determined that needed to be resolved before the 2.5 hours was over. And spent probably 5 or 6 minutes in dialogue with this individual, neglecting 12 other individuals in the room in the final, let's say, half hour. Fortunately, someone in the space interrupted and asked, and not surprising, this person is a teaching artist, a question that I think has become really vital to my process and builds off of what Ty has offered. What do people need to leave this space? And so I was fixated on the tension and agitation that this one person was coming. And it actually created more tension in the room, as opposed to diffusing and offering and actually allowing people to fill the space with what they wanted to, wish to articulate in. Right? Any other examples? We have 5 minutes left, or observations, questions, confusions, doubts. Is it?
Just a quick clarifying question about that last point, because I love that. When you say, like, what do you need to leave this space? What's an example of something you might hear? In part, I ask because I work a lot with younger students, and so something that abstract might be, it might be help to like clarify or give a bit more of a prompt.
Absolutely. This was an older population, and so I might not use the same sort of abstract language, but what I will say is we often move right back to the closing circle, which offering I statements or offering like where you're at, what's your takeaway. And I think sometimes we get so limited in the ways in which people might need to close out. So someone might say, I need to move around the room, or I need to just breathe. Can we just have actually 4 minutes of silence, as opposed to everyone sharing? And so I think calling in other people's desires can be a good practice, but yes, more difficult in regards to younger, because you might get complete silence, for sure.
No, but that is
Amanda. Thanks,
If you have anything
Amanda,
to say,
and then Pastor.
Isaac, you can,
go for it.
About that, you can go first. No?
Oh, no, I was just, Sean said it, calling in the desires of the young, you know, because it may not be articulated the same way, Izzy, but I think you can still speak to young people, and because at the end of the day, we're really just asking, what do you need to leave this space comfortably? Because sometimes things do disrupt the peace in the space. So maybe, you know, I think to keep it from being abstract, what I found useful with young people is give them some examples. That's helpful with everyone. Just give them some examples of what they might need. Do you need to walk around for a second? Do we all want to huddle around this person and just give them a group hug? You know, I throw a joke in there too, but it's really like, what do we really need in order to leave here in peace? You know, so.
That's right.
I'm sorry, Amanda.
Oh, that was great. That was great. This is from a little bit from before, just other examples, in addition to sharing their work. But one hit that we had at in our closing circle last year was a moment where you shined throughout the workshops, first, and like that self-appreciation, and then just sharing appreciation for anything else that you would like to from the whole event. And I think that really, before going out and giving your presentations and sharing how proud you are of the work that you created, it's nice to have that internal appreciation of the space and what we've created together and what each individual has brought to it. And it was really cute hearing everyone share. So I wanted to push that one out there. I love the idea of shining, like, one of my like dad's catchphrases, but the idea of like, everyone's always doing that. What is there a moment when someone brought it out in you, or when and that really helps cultivate feedback also in a different kind of way than just asking what would you like to change, what's different, what to highlight, but it takes it more to like the person, and that helps too, I think.
Thank you for that, Amanda. And you know what a lot of folks are offering is a strength-based approach. How are you pulling upon the strengths of what happened in space, what people offered? And how many folks have had a 2.5-hour workshop where you said to yourself, damn, that was miserable. And then a young person has come up to you afterwards and said, thank you so much for that. You never know what others' experiences are in the room unless you ask and pull upon the positive and leaving on that note. I really appreciate that. It's 11:29. So let's say, I want to end with Colby's question, but a few things in the chat before we go. Okja, cultivating gratitude for opportunities of transition. Beautiful. Edwin, my own curriculum wouldn't be it would. Was that an answer to Colby's question, Edwin? Okay, just a moment. Ty, you had your hand raised? Or are you good?
Oh, I was just going to say with what Amanda was saying, at the Brooklyn Free School, on people's birthdays, we do birthday appreciation, but you can do it to close an activity, just the facilitator saying what they appreciate about what each person brought to the day. Just to let people know, encourage to come back maybe, or to be in those spaces again, build confidence.
And no one actually mentioned this as a closing, articulating what happens next. Like, have people really contemplate what is coming next as a way to build motivation. So final question, Colby offered, and I wonder if anyone else has an answer. Is it a difference for you all in your own presence, in your own flow, if the project is mandated versus voluntary? Is the approach different? I have my own answer, but anyone else?
Yeah, I would say I had answered it, and I said my own curriculum wouldn't change, right? Because my intent is always to try to get at least one person. I hope I reached one person right, out the group. So it doesn't matter if it was voluntary or mandatory. My curriculum, my lesson plan will stay the same, unless if it was a mandated program and I was given the lesson to teach, then I would have to, try to formulate whatever was given to me along with my own way of doing a curriculum and trying to put it together.
Make adjustments.
Right. But I wanted to leave off and say just the wisdom is always in the group. So whatever group I have, I always rely on whatever the wisdom is in that group. A lot of experience.
I love that. Pastor Sadiq, and I'll offer a final comment before we close.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Edwin. I think I definitely have a different approach when people are mandated to be anywhere. The approach is more like I approach it like I'm gonna assume you don't really want to be here, So with that in mind, it's really like, well, what can I offer you in a little bit of time that I have with you that would be, that would work well with what I was hoping to bring to the space and what you actually want to get with your time here, especially when it's you're not going to see a person again. It makes no sense to go through something that they're never going to engage after that day. And it's really like, well, how can I just use the skill set I have to work with what you want at this moment or what you can use in this moment and go from there and make that moment more give it more substance than just trying to run through routine. And I think that's a lot of what I'm hearing today. And like we have to have a plan, but we have to be willing to, work through it and work it out different ways, however it needs to go in order to meet the needs of the people in the space.
And Abby echoed that in terms of malleability and being able to be to change the plan based on like how people are showing up, right? And offering more malleability when someone is at least psychologically forced to be in the space. Sadiq.
Yeah, I definitely agree and support what Pastor Isaac just mentioned and shared with us. And I really believe in, folks, and sometimes maybe it's just like the acknowledgement of like kind of stating that piece, but I also believe in folks' agency, autonomy, their own leadership, and self-determination. So, even if they were mandated to the program, no one dragged them out of bed and pushed them through the door. They made a leadership decision in walking through the door and entering the space. And so sometimes, respecting that and acknowledging that piece and, and they're taking that step for themselves and is sometimes helpful. It's like, they made a decision to show up because they could have made a decision not to show up.
Yeah. And approaching that with curiosity, like you made a decision. What is that? What is that about? And returning to pastor, like, you're here. So maybe you want something out of this. And I love Ty's comment in the chat, which is like, though the project or exercise might be mandated, you don't have to assume the role of power and authority. And I will also say this, and this is the point I want to leave on, and then unfortunately I need to run because I have a U-Haul illegally parked outside. There is a way in which, without occupying this role of authority, I do occupy a role of leadership. And I will openly say to a group, particularly because the assembly program historically has been mandated, a 4-week mandate, no less. I will say to a group, I guarantee you're going to get something out of this, and not leave it as a question. I start and say, if you give me any level of generosity, I guarantee that you will enjoy this process and get something out of it. And starting from that place of confidence and opportunity and allowing it to ripple in the room. I will also say this as a point that I want to leave everyone on. We do this work, and so much of it is thankless. So much of it is selfless, and so much of it is underpaid. When we do this work, and when you devise a plan that prioritizes all of these things, you are also prioritizing yourself. When you prioritize relationship, when you prioritize slowness and intentionality and care and fun, you are also prioritizing yourself. At the end of the day, if it is not feeding you, then you shouldn't be doing it. Scrap that lesson plan. Peace, y'all. Much love. Pastor, you have any closing remarks?
No, can we all just thank Sean? Thank you, Sean. I just want to shout out Sean and shout out the Recess team. I appreciate the work and just bringing all of this valuable wisdom to this space. Thank you to everyone who's participated. We're all sitting as equals in this space, sharpening each other for the work that we're going out to do. So I appreciate everyone for their participation on this Wednesday morning. I won't hold any more of your time. I will let you know that I will follow up in an email with this video as well with the slides from today, you know, and if there were any questions that you had or any areas or topics you wanted to go over specifically, do follow up and we can figure something out. We sure can do that. We're here for that. With that, have a blessed day, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Thank you all so much for this.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
10 minutes to get by the shopping.